Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to a pre-release analysis on Heizou.
Yes, something very interesting is about to happen. That's it. I'm taking this case over.
So, I'll be using Project Amber, which, shout out to them, very useful website. First things first, he's a Catalyst user, which means, right, he's dealing animo damage. Runs up to 5 fisticuffs empowered by a Mighty Wind, dealing animo damage, which means he's a melee Catalyst user. Uses his fists. Charge attack consumes a certain amount of stamina and performs a sweeping kick that deals animo damage. Now, if we look at the charge attack cost, it's 25, unlike other Catalysts, which are 50, which will be relevant once we get to it. Plunge attack, whatever, same as usual. E. Heartstopper Strike. Tap wields the Swift Wind to launch a Heartstopper Strike that deals animo damage, which will increase the power of Heartstopper Strike when the skill button is released or the skill finishes charging. It will strike forward. So many words. Basically, it deals damage, and then if you hold it, it deals more damage. Q. Windmaster Kick leaps into the air and uses the Fudo-style Vacuum Slugger and kicks his opponent. The Vacuum Slugger will explode upon hit and create an arresting wind tunnel, pulls in nearby objects and opponents, dealing AoE animo damage. When the thing hits opponents affected by Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, Electro, these opponents will be afflicted with Windmaster Iris. Windmaster Iris will explode after a moment and dissipate, dealing AoE animo damage of the corresponding, AoE damage of the corresponding aforementioned elemental type. Vacuum Slugger can afflict a maximum of 4 opponents with the Windmaster Iris. A single opponent cannot be under the effect of Windmaster Irises of different elements at the same time. Passive: when Heizou activates a swirl reaction while on field, he will gain 1 clenching stack for Heartstopper Strike. This effect can be triggered once every 0.1 second, which is very interesting. We'll get to that later as well. After Heizou's Heartstopper Strike hits an opponent, increases all party members except Heizou's Elemental Mastery by 80 for 10 seconds, and decrease sprinting stamina consumption for your own party members by 20%. So, knowing that, right, this is animo damage, this is animo damage, this is animo damage. His Ascension stat is animo damage bonus. His base attack is somewhat low, but within the expected range for a 4-star character. Same for base HP, base defense. Nothing crazy in his base stats. Let's start looking at the numbers. Talent level 9 on everything. Let's start by looking at the burst, right? It has a 12-second cooldown for the energy cost, which is very low. It's the lowest cooldown and energy cost we have for burst right now. We have Ningguang burst, Albedo burst, Zhongli burst, Chongyun burst. What else is like this? Ember burst, I think? Diluc burst, Kunsing burst. No one has lower than that for now. But one thing that you'll notice if you've played any of these characters is it's very difficult for to build a rotation around 12-second bursts, and most of the time you'll just use your burst once per rotation, which is generally like 20-ish seconds, rather than once every 12 seconds. So effectively, the nice part about this is that it's a low energy cost rather than it being a low cooldown, right? The low cooldown doesn't really matter because you're probably not casting it off cooldown. The actual damage is 535, which is honestly really low for a burst. If we look at similar bursts, right? We look at, like, for example, Zhongli's burst, talent level 9, 834. If we look at Amber's burst, talent level 9, 859. If you look at Katsing, about 800-ish again, right? So usually 40 cost 12-second bursts are deal closer to the range of, if they're like one hit, of 800-ish than 500-ish, right? So his damage is not like all that insane on his burst. But let's look at his skill. The base damage is 386, assuming he's not clenched yet. But when he starts getting very clenched, that he gets conviction, he gets 4 stacks of clench, which is about 400, plus the 400 base, plus about 200 from the conviction. So it's like almost, it's not exactly because I rounded up like 3 times, but it's almost 1,000 motion value on a 10-second cooldown. This one is actually pretty fucking relevant. He has a mid cooldown skill with a lot of damage. But here's the thing. Out of the animal units we have, looking at the ones that are not played as hyper carries, because we'll get into why later, but I don't think he's going to be really playable as, or a good hyper carry. The on-field animals we have are mostly played in Taser teams. And in Taser teams, if you're building for a big hit like this, then you don't get a lot of elemental mastery. And if you don't get a lot of elemental mastery, then your chain reactions aren't doing a lot of damage, which is pretty rough. It is hard for me to tell whether he's gonna be a unit that you want to build with attack, damage, and crit, or if he's gonna be a unit you want to build with EM. We'll probably get into calcs on that and trying to find breakpoints for that a little bit later. But my point simply being that him having a really strong motion value on his E might not be quite as good as it might seem, because it's possible you might want to build him for Elemental Mastery anyways. Let's look at his normal attacks now. Now, his normal attacks are relatively underwhelming. Now, the good part about his normal attacks is that, from what I've seen, his charge attack comes out very, very quickly. So you can do N1C, or one normal attack followed by a charge attack, very, very quickly. And his charge attack does not share internal cooldown with his normal attack, which means if you do N1C, you get very, very quickly 2 swirls, and, in the same way, 2 clench stacks, right? You get clenched, which is good. Also, from what I've seen, his hold seems to be really, really bad. It looks like it is incredibly slow to actually get the stacks. And so it really looks like you're gonna be trying to use his Ascension 1 passive to get the clench stacks rather than actually holding your skill, right? The charge attack has no ICD, so you probably be able to do like N1C 2 times, or N2C twice. That's gonna give you 4 stacks of clench. Or you could probably do N1C burst N1C. Now, my favorite artifact set is the Thundering Fury set. I think it's a very good design for an artifact set that can, under certain conditions, change the playstyle of certain units. I think that the conditions for it are niche enough for it not to be broken, but the reward for it is good enough for it not to be useless. In other words, I think it's a very, very good design. So, triggering such effects, being Overloaded, Electrocharged, and Superconduct, decreases elemental skill cooldown by 1 second. Now, it is an Electro set, so why the fuck am I talking about this for Heizou? Well, the thing about Heizou is he's an Anemo unit. He can swirl. And the way that swirl works is it spreads the element that's on a specific enemy to other nearby enemies. But now, if one of the enemies is affected by Electro, and the other one's affected by Pyro, and you swirl the one that's affected by Electro, that Electro is going to spread and is going to trigger Overloaded on the one that's affected by Pyro. In a situation like that, you would actually get a Thundering Fury proc. Now, I don't think Overloaded is going to be the way, but I've played a lot of Thundering Fury Kazuha. So pay close attention to my skill cooldown on Kazuha. So we start with this. Now, I don't have C1, by the way, right? The reason I can do EQE is because of the Thundering Fury set. Point being, I can reliably get procs on the Thundering Fury set, which is going to reduce my cooldown on my elemental skill. Now, important to note, Kazuha's elemental application works differently than Heizou's. Kazuha infuses his plunge attack, which means when he comes back down, he applies the element he infused, not just Anemo, which helps with reliability. The reason why a team like this runs Venti over basically any different unit is because, well, if I have Kazuha on Thundering Fury, I don't have Viridescent Venomer, and Viridescent Venomer is kind of fucking broken. And so I want to have another Anemo unit. Now, Heizou can't Hydro Infuse his E, and his burst only applies 1 instance of element. But that's not necessarily a problem. Who can I use to show it properly? I guess Xiao. I don't have C6 Fischl, so I'm gonna be using Raiden just to make sure I don't run out of Electro application. But I'll show it with Xiao, I guess. The Thundering Fury set isn't that good on Xiao because Xiao doesn't really care about getting more E's. Most of his damage comes from his burst. From his plunge attacks in burst. And because his E's don't generate energy in his burst, getting more E's doesn't really do anything other than do a tiny little bit more damage. It's mostly irrelevant. But pay attention to my skill cooldown right now, right? It is getting reduced every little while, right? Realistically, we make our 10-second cooldown about 6 seconds instead of 10, as long as we stay on field. Now, the reason why this is relevant for Heizou is because it really looks like if you are building Heizou with attack, Anemo damage, and crit, you are going to be getting most of your damage from your elemental skill. And so getting more damage or less cooldown on your elemental skill becomes becomes pretty fucking relevant. The basic premise for that is you need to already have an Animo unit on your team so that they get the VV from themselves, and you need to have enough Hydro and Electro application, but most importantly, you need to be an AoE. In single target, it does not work. Right? You're able to see that I'm not getting any procs right now. I'm not getting a single proc of the TF set. Because Animo units can only trigger Electrocharge by triggering a chain reaction, spreading the Hydro or Electro onto another enemy that has Hydro or Electro. If that happens, then if an Electrocharge happens, it is going to count as a Thundering Fury proc. But if there's no enemy to spread it to, they're not applying any Hydro or Electro, so they're not actually triggering the TF set. And so this means that if you are planning on playing Thundering Fury Kazuha, Thundering Fury Heizou, then it's only gonna work in AoE situations. That being said, it only working in AoE doesn't mean that it's not worth talking or thinking about. It can still be very good in AoE, potentially. My expectation is gonna be pretty decent way to play him. Will it be the best way to play him? I don't think so. I think it is somewhat too reliant on specific scenarios to work very well. But even then, I think it's pretty good. Is it enough to justify farming Thundering Fury for someone who doesn't want to play it just because it looks cool? Probably not. But still, it sure looks fucking cool. The last thing I want to look at for his talent is the scaling on his normal attack combo. With what we've seen, his normal attack combo is somewhat fast, but it's not incredibly fast. It really doesn't look like he's going to be a very good normal attack spammer when it comes to just the motion value. But his charge attack is not terrible, and it comes out very, very, very quickly. And so he might be an okay N1C spammer. Now, because of the way that internal cooldowns work, for internal cooldown, there's a hit rule and there's a time rule. I'm gonna go do a very, very quick explanation. If you want a more in-depth explanation, go watch the Ayato pre-release. But the baseline is the first attack always applies an element. The following attack will not apply an element, and attacks will not apply an element until one of two rules is met. Now, the two rules that can be met to make it so that an element reapplies an element are called the hit rule and the time rule. And as you can expect, the hit rules looks at the amount of hits you've done, and the time rule looks at the amount of time that has passed. So the hit rule is a 3-hit rule, and the time rule is a 2.5 second, generally. Some characters have slightly different, but yeah. The hit rule dictates that if it's the third hit after a hit that has applied an element, it will apply an element again. So if I attack 4 times, the first time applies an element, the second time won't, the third time won't, and then the fourth time will, because it's the third one after the first one. And then same thing, no, and then another yes. The time rule, what it dictates is if it's been 2.5 seconds since your first application, everything resets. It's as if you're doing your first application again. So the next one will apply again. So if I attack at time equals 0, I get it. At time equal 1.5, I don't, because it hasn't been 2.5 seconds. But then at 3, it has been 2.5 seconds, so I apply, and it starts over. So this is my new time equals 0. At 4.5, I don't. At 6, I do. But the interesting part is that the time rule also resets the hit rule. And so depending on the frequency at which you attack, the pattern of how many of your hits are getting an elemental application will be different. So how is this relevant to Heizou? Depending on which combo he does, he'll be basically able to apply a different amount of Animo. The more Animo he applies, the more he gets clench stacks for his skill, but also the more swirls he does. And even if you don't build him with EM as the main thing you're looking for, it still deals damage. It's still useful. Okay, so here's a sheet I've been given. It looks like the N1C is 78 frames or 1.3 seconds. And so doing 2 N1Cs will take 2.6 seconds, right? Which should mean that the time rule kicks in after the second N1C. And so you should be applying Animo every 2 N1Cs. Yeah, yes, no, yes, no. So we're gonna have N1 charge attack, N1 charge attack, N1 charge attack, N1 charge attack. It's gonna be swirl, swirl, nothing, swirl, 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 nothing, swirl. This looks like that's what we've been given so far, but obviously always subject to change. It's possible, it's just wrong. We don't know yet, which is really good, by the way. Like, this is a really good application, but it's also stamina heavy, right? It takes a lot of stamina to do this. The main reason why his elemental application is important is to know how early he can use his E. From what we know, his hold E is really slow to come out. And so you don't want to use it. You want to actually swirl properly before. Anyways, it looks like he's going to have a few viable combos, but the main idea is that you want to get your four swirls as quickly as possible, and then you want to use your E. Now, his clenching stacks, after you've used your first E, you're gonna, keep swirling. And so you're not gonna have to pre-stack for your next E. For your next E, you'll be able to just use it at the beginning. You'll be able to just start with it. What weapon should he be on? We're making an actual weapon sheet. TDDS, good in Xiao Teams, fine in Taser, fine free-to-play for total damage, Jotoko Tails, Fav Codex, decent team DPS of high, fine, but Hakushin, good free-to-play for Taser, team DPS, yep. Very good in Taser, very good in AoE. Solar Pearl, good, 4-star for personal DPS. No. Witsith, very good, especially at high refine. Memory of Dust, okay overall, overall, okay. Overall. I'll try to order them, actually. Witsith, Sackfrag are probably the two best. Then, I mean, depending on what team you're using him in. Skyward Atlas, Hakushin, TTDS, probably the other 5 stars. Then probably Mappamare. Then probably, or maybe Solar. It's probably Solar Pearl above Mappamare. Then probably Prototype Amber. Then this. Then this. More or less a weapon ranking, but it's hard to do like only one weapon ranking because on different builds, different weapons are better. But yeah. Artifacts. 4-piece, Iridescent, Venerer. Yes. This one's pretty obvious. He's an Animo unit. He wants VV. As we talked about a little bit earlier, 4-piece Thundering Fury. Potentially good in double Animo Taser teams. Right? Something like Heizou, Fischl, Xingqiu, Kazuha. Or hell, replace Xingqiu with Yelan if you can get away without a healer. Your Heizou's probably going to be doing a fuck ton of damage. You'll get your, 3 E's per rotation instead of 2. Those E's are going to hurt quite a bit. Now, if you manage to play him in a team where you already have another VV unit, but it's not a team where you want to use Thundering Fury, what other sets could you think about? Because most of his damage is coming from skill, so you maybe 2 TF to Glad, but honestly, you probably just get more damage out of the 4-piece VV effect on his swirls. That's how insignificant it would be. I think those are the only 2 sets you'll stick with. Now, artifacts, we already talked about the artifact sets, but we haven't talked about artifact substats and main stats. Triple EM, better in AoE, much better in AoE in Taser. Crit build, better in single target. Yeah, I guess we can talk about hybrid. Hybrid is fine, but not really. It's not really something I'd recommend. Teams. What are we gonna have? We're gonna have Taser. We're gonna have, I guess, National. Freeze, I guess. Could you use him with Hutao and VV Vape? Not very well. Not better than the other options. I don't like it very much. Soup. What kind of soup teams would you use him in? He can't really get infusion, so probably wouldn't use him with Bennett. But then in what? Changling soup? Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it, but I probably won't recommend it. Mono Element? I mean, we can talk about it as well. We can talk about Xiao as well. Hyper. I guess those are the teams we should talk about, right? Taser, probably his best teams. It's where he's gonna shine. If he's not good in Taser, he's dog shit. I expect him to be pretty good in Taser. Remains to see if better than Sucrose. My expectation is not very hopeful, but it wouldn't surprise me if he were to sheet better than Sucrose. His Animo application seems to be faster than Sucrose's. He seems to have more sources of Animo application because you can reliably use his charge attacks, whereas Sucrose's charge attacks are very long and very stamina hungry. So I would expect him to sheet better. Maybe he won't, but I wouldn't be surprised if he were to sheet better than Sucrose and sim better than Sucrose, but because he's melee, and because his grouping on his burst seems to be really bad, I just don't see it in practice actually doing better than Sucrose Taser. Unless you're against heavy enemies. But even then, performing similarly to Sucrose Taser, very, very good. Very valuable. Very nice. Now, do you need to get that? Probably not. I'd say Heizou's probably one of those units that if you already have Sucrose and Kazuha, probably won't be that worth. But if you only have Sucrose and you don't have Kazuha, you want to use Sucrose in like a Xiangling team or something, and you still want to be able to play Taser, then Heizou looks like he could be a pretty good pull for your account. But obviously, right, as usual, wait until the units actually release and we've done some testing before you actually wish on them. In National, cope option, but it's still Animo. In other words, is it better than Sucrose? Probably not. Is it good? Yes, it is. Freeze. Probably decent animal option, but no off field, so won't be the best. Still okay though. Soup, no. I think he's probably gonna be a really bad animal option for Soup. He doesn't have any grouping, nor does he have any elemental absorption, proper elemental absorption. So you can't really play him with Bennett like you could play Kazuha, and you can't really play him with Xiangling because like he's gonna overload shit away from you. I think he's gonna be probably the worst animal option for Soup. Is it gonna be fine? Yes, because Soup is really good, like, as a baseline, so you'll be fine. But would I ever recommend him and Soup over other animal options? No, I wouldn't. Mono teams, if you play him in Mono Pyro, and Mono Electro, and Mono Hydro, and Mono whatever the fuck, right? You're kind of just, he's not really bringing any value as other than just the VV, right? And so a lot of other animal options would do better again here. But it's functional. Sure, why not? Xiao, not really. You're better off going Sucrose. Sucrose gets, with her C1, gets a charge on her E, which just makes her a better battery, like significantly better battery. Needs less field time. It's just better. I would not recommend him with Xiao. And finally, Hyper, very cope, but functional. It's not gonna be good, but you're gonna see big animal numbers, and if that's what gives you serotonin, then hey, knock yourself out. His Constellations do make Hyper a little bit better. We haven't talked about his Constellations yet, so we can do that. His C1 gives him attack speed. His C2 makes his grouping a tiny bit less cope, but still cope. His C3 is the E bonus damage. His C4 gives him energy generation when he uses his burst. His C5 is the burst constellation, and his C6 gives him crit rate and crit damage on his E. Looking at the increase from C0 to C6 on the E damage. So effectively, going to up to C6 from C0 is like about a 50% increase on his E damage. You'll see bigger numbers. It's nice. Honestly, probably still not enough to make his Hyper teams like actually good. But there's a lot of teams that aren't good and people still play. Like it's fine. And if you put like Yelan on the team for her damage bonus, you can like pretend that you're not getting hard carried by Yelan's damage. Right? Like there's it's fine. But I just generally wouldn't recommend Hyper over something like Taser for Heizou. Man, I think that does it for the pre-release. Final thoughts. Heizou's looking like he's gonna be a good unit. Our first real good Inazuma 4-star. Fucking finally. It's gonna be in 2.8. That's literally the last patch before Sumeru. We got our first good Inazuma 4-star on the last patch before... That's not true. That's not true. Goro's also really good. Okay, but still, okay. We get our second good Inazuma 4-star right before Sumeru. I don't think he's gonna be better than Sucrose. I don't think he's gonna be like quite on the same level as like Bennett, Tingto, Sucrose, Xiangling. But I do think he's gonna be pretty good. Looking forward to his release. Bye YouTube. Thank you for dropping by. Yeah. See you.